What's going on, everyone? So I've seen a lot of just kind of criticism from Anthony Edwards recently after the things that he said about Minnesota. Now, the team isn't playing together. Everyone kind of feels like they have different agendas, right? Like they're just in disarray. This team is an absolute mess. And Anthony Edwards has not really held back his tongue at all, right? And people are talking about how he's just toxic, all that. But we've seen players in the past do it, and it's considered like, oh man, he just wants to win. That's a leader, right? I mean, even like coaches, like Phil Jackson has thrown players under the bus and talked about how they don't want to play and win. I mean, even stories, like think of like stories Shaq has said and stuff like that about like things Phil Jackson has said publicly and unpublicly. I mean, Pop has said stuff for it, right? Like, it's not crazy to think that, your star player is furious. He was just in the conference finals and now they can't win a game, right? Like, they lost to Portland twice, right? Like, they can't beat anybody. They're terrible. Like I said, this team guys have different agendas, right? Guys have different goals here, right? You look at a guy like a Julius Randle, he's playing for a contract. He ain't trying to fit in. He ain't trying to figure out how to make this work. He wants to go make sure he makes 30, 40 million again, right? Like, but it's Minnesota's fault. And this is the thing that it's crazy to me, right? Because their whole logic in like, oh, we're going to trade Karl Anthony Towns was for Anthony Edwards. And now they're probably going to lose Anthony Edwards because they were foolish and trading the only guy that made sense next to Anthony Edwards. You made the foolish decision of going and trading for Rudy Gobert. I know they were in the conference finals last year, but Rudy Gobert regularly got played off the court, right? He's a liability at times. The defense doesn't equate to the issues that he provides. Anthony Edwards is one of the best, if not the best, rim pressure players in the entire NBA. And you have a big tree just planted in the middle that can't, like, anything outside of 5 feet, teams don't care. Let him. Like, wherever he wants to, you want to move, go 7 feet? Fine, stay there. We'll worry about him. And you take that, and then you add in, a Julius Randle who doesn't spread the floor. He's had seasons where he's been good, but he's not this like great elite. He's not Karl Anthony Towns shooting the 3 ball. And he likes to operate inside and play that bully ball mentality. And then, you look at Jaden McDaniels, one of the best defensive players out on the perimeter in the league, right? Excellent perimeter defender, but he can't shoot, right? Like, so teams are just completely staying off him. Like, they had the game the other night, and like, literally the overtime, they just let Jaden McDaniels shoot, literally, and he didn't make a single shot. And then, so like, you have no shooting around Anthony Edwards, you have a big tree in the middle, and you have the best player in the league as far as athleticism and rim pressure goes, and you neutralized him. At least with Karl Anthony Towns, he stretches the floor and he's a legit threat. Also, at any point, you could take Rudy Gobert out of the game, slide Karl Anthony Towns to the 5, and then he could still stretch the floor and run that 2-man game. Like, out of everybody you should have traded, it wasn't Karl Anthony Towns, especially for Julius Randle. Like, yes, you got Dante DiVincenzo in that, but he apparently wants out. And they're talking about trading him potentially. And he's not happy there. And he's been inconsistent for them. He's having a terrible season, especially after what he came off of. And Minnesota just doesn't, 1 minute they're starting him, next minute he's not even playing. Like, it's a mess. Minnesota sabotaged themselves. You didn't have to trade Cat now, right? Like, you just were in the conference finals. What's wrong with just running it back and maybe adding a couple pieces around the edges and, maybe seeing what happens? Seeing if maybe you'll win a championship, right? Like, if the goal is to put Anthony Edwards in the best position possible, well, you're just in it. You're just in the conference finals. So now what? So now you're going to let Julius Randle walk? Or you're going to trade him for another silly trade? Because you're not going to be able to trade Rudy Gobert. Could you maybe trade Jaden McDaniels? Possibly. Right? But, for what? What are you going to get? Right? Like, it makes no sense if you're Minnesota. And they're a second apron team. So there's all this talk about, they're interested in this guy and that guy and this guy. How? Like, one, who are they trading that a team really wants? And two, it's like, okay, you're a second apron team, so you have to find a third team, which means you have to give up, you don't have assets. Like, they're a mess. They're an absolute mess. And this just shows, like, there's a reason they don't win championships. There's a reason that they're not in the conversation, because they're poorly ran. The decision-making is awful. From the Rudy Gobert trade. Like, if they would have gotten Rudy Gobert for a bag of chips, sure. Right? Like, if you would have gotten Rudy Gobert at that time, right? Because, you know, he's coming off of Defense Player of the Years and all that stuff. And I get the logic of, like, Karl-Anthony Towns shoots the ball so well, you can run two bigs, right? He stretches the floor, so you can have Karl-Anthony Towns, or you can have Rudy Gobert, you know, kind of manning the middle and better defense, right? What were our big issues? It was rebounding and interior defense, right? Rudy Gobert kind of solves those things. And look, they went to the conference finals, right? So it's like, okay, kind of justify, you kind of make the argument. I still don't think it was a good trade for them to do, because, again, they didn't take Anthony Edwards into account. Right? Like, yeah, should have just stayed. Minnesota was a team that was like, if they just stayed the course, they might have won a championship. But instead, they were like, oh, let's try to expedite this. Like, you saw the same thing with, like, Atlanta, right? Atlanta, they get to the conference finals, and what do? Instead of staying the course and waiting for that right move, that right piece, they go, let's go get DeJounte Murray. And they haven't been to the playoffs since. Like, they're just a play-in team every year, right? Like, why? Because it didn't make sense. It didn't work. It didn't fit. Like, everybody knew that. Like, Trae Young's one of the highest usage players in the history. And you wanted to add a point guard. Like, kid, it's like Karl-Anthony Towns gives you so much versatility at the center position, especially alongside Anthony Edwards. And instead of adding the complementary piece, okay, well, we need interior defense, stuff like that. Okay, well, then go get a guy that can slot in at the 4 and provide that. Or, you know, not a guy that cost you 5 firsts and 7 players and all that you're never going to be able to trade. Right? Like, why not? Why didn't you just be patient and go after, like, Miles Turner, you know, when Indiana was looking to trade him a couple seasons ago, right? I mean, the Lakers technically traded for him, right? And that ended up getting done. As soon as that happened, like, you could have went and got him. Be like, hey, well, the Lakers snooze, they lose. Hey, we'll give you that. And you probably wouldn't have traded anything close to what you gave up for Rudy Gobert. And you only had to wait, another 6 months? Like, again, it's poor decision making. It's jumping the gun. It's not looking at the team and what you had, right? Like, you had a team that went where? Right? Like, you won and made the playoffs, won an play-in game, made the playoffs. Great. Okay, you need to trade D'Angelo Russell. Fine. Right? Trade D'Lo. But, like, why'd you do all this other crazy stuff? And then, again, you were just in the conference finals. You didn't have to trade Karl-Anthony Towns this season. You wanted the flexibility and all that stuff. Okay, well, why not wait and see how it looks? Right? And then if it's bad, and let's say you're in the spot you're in right now, then maybe you trade Karl-Anthony Towns at the trade deadline. You probably would have gotten a better return, too, because you probably would have had some of these teams that were desperate. Right? Maybe would have given you an absolute haul for Karl-Anthony Towns. Right? Rather than just Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. Right? I mean, the Warriors are like waiting to just sell the farm to go get another star for Curry, especially after the season they've had. Right? Like, you might have been able to get Kuminga and all these other guys and done all this stuff where even if you're like, hey, we want to kind of go more like win now, you could have probably flipped their package to go get, you know, if Giannis becomes available in the offseason, right? You could have probably taken that package, went and done something like that, right? And especially if he's like, man, I got Anthony Edwards, like me, Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns, or, well, you traded Karl-Anthony Towns, but, like, you know, me and Anthony Edwards, you know, like, I don't know, maybe it changes things, right? Like, I don't know. I just think it was a poor decision. People are mad at Anthony Edwards, but why? Like, again, we this isn't the first player to do it, and usually in the past, it was like, got that dog, right? It's like, it's really weird, because, like, you know, as a Laker fan, like, even Kobe, like, there's things that Anthony Edwards does that are just like, thank you. It's just that old school mentality, just that, like, no games, like, just no nonsense, right? Like, I love that. You know, maybe it's as somebody that grew up with Kobe, right? But, like, people, like, that's one of the things people loved about Kobe, right? Like, calling his players soft as tissue and, like, it's just, you know, being in practices and just, like, you know, people love that about Jimmy Butler And Jimmy Butler's thrown players and people and all kinds of stuff on it. Like Jimmy Butler, people go, oh man, Jimmy, he's that old school dog. Gotta love it. But then like Anthony Edwards does it. People are like, wow, kid just acting out. What? It's like, what? Like, no, he's furious. I would be furious. He was just in the conference finals, and you stripped that team from him. And now they're one of the worst teams in the West, and it's the West. Like, you don't have time to play around and figure stuff out. It's like we were just in the conference finals. We'd probably be a top 3 to 4 seed at worst right now, and probably be in the NBA final. Like, just stay the course, or wait. Like, what difference would it have made if you waited this season? You went to the conference finals. Let's see if we can get to the finals or win a championship. And then, like, let's say you lose in the first round. Okay, well, then maybe look to, like, do it. But what if you would have won a championship? Or you would have been in the finals? It's like, man, like, we're right there. Let's just stay the course, right? Like, but instead, you jumped the gun, but you didn't have a plan. And I said it wasn't going to work. I said it made no sense. And people told me, like, all the Minnesota fans came out of the woodworks and were like, you're wrong, Tyler. Julius Randle is going to make them tougher. Like, this is a trade about toughness and blah, 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 blah. I thought that's why you traded for Rudy Gobert. That was the point. To add some interior presence, right? Like, it's silly. It's absolutely silly. I don't blame Anthony Edwards at all. I think he's been too nice. And they're probably going to lose Anthony Edwards now because of their poor decision making. I don't know. Again, maybe it's just, Jordan, Kobe, Phil Jackson, like, grew up in that era, grew up in the 90s, early 2000s, right? So maybe it's just like that attitude that, like, hey, if these guys aren't good enough, get rid of them, right? Like, maybe that's just how I think. I don't know. But I love Anthony Edwards. Right? Maybe it's just biased on me because I like Anthony. Like, he's like my favorite player. Like, I love watching that kid play. Like, to me, I think has the potential to be the best player in the league in like 2 years. Right? Like, so maybe it is a bias thing. I don't know. But I love the attitude. Right? Like, say it. Let him know. Giannis calls out his organization and his players, and everyone's like, bravo. Get this man some help. Anthony Edwards does it. Everyone's like, he's a kid. He's like, stop. Like, the guy's furious. Like, I would be too. Like, you can't blame him. Right? Like, but anyway, as always, this is a discussion. So I pass the question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? Do you agree with me? Do you think, like, yeah, like, dude, duck Anthony Edwards, right? Do you think, like, no, it's childish, like, you shouldn't have done that? I understand you don't want things getting out of the locker room. I understand, like, certain things, like, there's stuff you want to stay behind closed doors. But, to think that if he's willing to do it public, you don't think that he did it behind closed doors, right? Like, at what point do you say some stuff? Right? And he didn't, like, single out individual guys. He's just like, dude, like, we all have different agendas. We all have different things. We've heard that before from other players and been like, so at least finally somebody says it, right? Like, but now Anthony Edwards says it. Everyone's like, oh, it makes no sense to me. But I would feel whatever your thoughts are. Let me know down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot. Helps me enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Not subscribe channel, hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one. Thank you.